And apologies for being late. I have the Gender Equality Committee also this morning. Thanks very much for coming in. Great to see you again. Last week we had the Department of Justice here, and one of the questions that we were going through was the transposition of the Anti-Money Laundering Directive, which I think was European Directive of 2015, which was ultimately transposed in 2019. And the state was exposed to a €2 million fine as a consequence of the 2-year late transposition of it. I think it was supposed to be done in 2017. The reason I raise it is twofold. One, it seemed to me that there needed to be an interaction with the Department of Finance in terms of the development of the legislation to transpose the directive, and what was the situation there, and do you want to speak to that, and is there anything else that we need to be concerned about in terms of delays or fines as related to the transposition of directives? And secondly then, sorry, because I know I'm coming to this in a slightly odd way, may not have prepared for that, so the second question then is about any further legislation or further directives requiring transposition in relation to money laundering from the EU, and if there's anything that the Department of Finance can speak to on that.
Thanks, Deputy. I mean, the anti-money laundering agenda has been ongoing for quite a number of years at an EU level. I suppose the directives very much set the context in which we kind of transpose the rules that are agreed at the European level, and we're very much involved. We're very much involved in it. Can I just say that there is a new package that was agreed on the 20th of July 2021. It has 4 elements: new regulation, which will collectively replace the current 5th anti-money laundering directive, a new directive itself, the 6th one, a revised funds transfer regulation, and a regulation establishing a new central supervisor for AML matters at an EU level. I mean, while the anti-money laundering piece touches quite a number of areas, and you rightly identify the Department of Justice has been part of that. So there is a very strong coordination through the Anti-Money Laundering Committee, which I think our department chairs, but it has representatives from the different areas across the state where the anti-money laundering and indeed terrorist financing issues arise. Sometimes this I suppose transposition can be difficult and can touch on different departments and so on. So we do coordinate right across the different bodies. I think from the department side, anything that we've needed to do is up to date, but I'll double check on that, Deputy, and if it's something to the contrary, we'll come back on it. But I suppose we're very conscious that when we're transposing the regulations that we do them correctly, and we're very mindful, particularly where it does touch on other areas, that we're cognizant of what the impact might be.
I appreciate that, Mr. Hogan. And I suppose our concern from the committee's perspective was that there was such a large fine, that it was an unusual thing, that there was, as you say, a series of anti-money laundering directives, and I think in our dialogue with the Department of Justice they indicated that, you know, it can be difficult to keep up, that there was, you know, directive after directive in relation to it, and I suppose it generated a concern here that, well, difficult to keep up sort of isn't where we want to be. First of all, we're engaged at a European level in the development of much of the technical detail behind the directives, you know, so we're already in it. It's not a surprise when it comes out that then somehow has to be transposed. So there really isn't a reason for, you know, ongoing delays and fines accruing as a consequence of that when we're engaged in the policy development in the first instance. Is it fair to say we're engaged, you know, that we have sight
at EU level?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, well, we are, yeah.
Naturally.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. So is there any other difficulty? I mean, what we're concerned about, I suppose, and particularly now since in the last 10 weeks with the exposure from Russia and the concerns in relation to financing, money laundering generally, is that we are in fact at the top of our game on this, and not as we have been over the last 6 years coming behind and paying fines in relation to it.
I think it's fair to say that, you know, we have had to invest quite a bit of effort in you know, meeting the regulations and meeting the standards that are expected on that. I think that we are we've certainly closed that gap, to be frank. And on the financial sanctions, we've been extremely active on that over the last number of months as a result of the war in Ukraine. The package of sanctions has emerged at a European level, at sometimes extraordinary speed, but we have been very conscious of our obligations at international level to move quickly to transpose those, and we've done them successfully.
And tell me this then, so it really is up to, as far as I understand, to the banks and to the companies to actually in practical effect impose the sanctions, is that correct?
That's right.
So what's the level of oversight then from the department's perspective to see that that is so? How does that work?
Well, there is, I suppose, oversight through the Anti-Money Laundering Committee, but also the Central Bank has a role in relation to the financial sector, as have and are very active in terms of their.
Is there a reporting structure, for example, from the banks or the financial institutions to the Central Bank in relation to this specifically?
As far as I'm aware, there certainly is a lot of interaction in relation to it, Deputy. But the precise detail of how that works, maybe I'll come back to you on that.
Okay, that would be great. Thank you. If I could just then ask about there's sort of general questions and general ill ease, and I got a very good response back from the Department of Finance, which I think is worth putting on the record, just about the exposure, the securitisations, the exposure of the financial market generally to Russian assets, as it were. And I think you told me, and correct me if I'm wrong, not you, but the department, not you personally, but the department, that only 0.1%, at the end of 2021, Russian assets represented 0.1% of the on and off balance sheet financial assets and liabilities held by Irish authorised banks, or 1.7 billion, 0.3% of total assets of authorised investment funds, or 11.5 billion, and 0.1% of the total insurance sector assets, or 97 million. And I think you gave me numbers as well in relation to the special purpose entities, that just under 2% of the 3,000 special purpose entities, which of course are a totally legitimate entity in themselves, had been identified as having links to Russia, and that it was currently estimated that 1 in 3 of those, that is 17 SPEs being 0.5% of the total SPE population, was directly linked to individuals in the scope of the sanctions regime. I suppose, could I just ask you your perspective? It seems to me to be a contained exposure. I don't want to say it's a small exposure, but it seems to be a contained exposure. But what would the concerns of the department be as we move forward in relation to this, particularly as I've asked you about the enforcement of sanctions that have been imposed by the EU?
Yeah, and I think the important thing for us was to put the sanctions regime that was expected of us internationally in place, and we've done that successfully. The figures that we quoted there are reviews undertaken by the Central Bank, so that they have kind of a strong interaction as a result of the details that they get from the 3,000 SPEs in Ireland in relation to their background and so on. So I think that there's strong and rigorous oversight, Deputy, in relation to that. And the information flow, I think, can give the committee some comfort that that interaction conducted by the Central Bank has been successful in identifying the scope and exposure there. I mean, we will, obviously, as this unfolds, if there are additional requirements at EU level, we will react to them at the same speed as we've done over the last number of months. I
appreciate that, but there's a number there directly linked, identifiably linked, and it's useful that, as you say, they can be identified, and let's hope that is the universe of that, to individuals linked to the sanction regime. I suppose my question is then, what happens next? How can we be sure of enforcement? That's really what I want to know.
Yeah, well, I mean, as I say, the mechanism around enforcement is with the Central Bank in that instance. There is another aspect which is interesting, and it's just not national, but it's also transnational, in that at an EU level, on the 7th of March, member states were advised that the European Commission had launched its whistleblower tool. So if individuals identify that there are challenges and issues there, that it can be raised there, so there are various mechanisms, I think, where the correct assessment around all of this will be monitored and would be enforced.
And can I ask you your assessment of the relative exposure of the Irish financial industry, as I've outlined, to the Russian assets, as it were? Is it something that we need to be concerned about?
I think we always keep these things under review, Deputy. I mean, we are a part of a global financial infrastructure. It is an important part of for Ireland in terms of our economy. It's something that has been developed over the last number of years. So all of these things, I think, are things that we're very conscious of. We'll keep them under review, but I mean that's to be expected, absolutely expected in relation to it. Because I mean, in all of these things.
But what's your assessment of it, Mr.
When we look at these things, Deputy, our assessment at the moment is on the basis of the information that we have conducted through the Central Bank, that we've done what needs to be done in relation to this. It will absolutely be kept under review, but
what's your assessment as it relates to risk, I suppose, is my question.
Well, in relation to the risk, the important thing is that we have information of what the potential is. and that potential has been identified by the central bank, has been identified in the numbers that you correctly have cited there, and that I have in my own briefing document here, and that you know, to the extent that a risk exists in this space, I think that we've corralled and identified it, and we'll continue to ensure that as our understanding evolves as to what the expectation is internationally, that we adapt and we monitor the situation.
Thank you.